Kathleen, of course, was born here in Chico and went through Chico schools, Chico High School grad, went into Chico State there with a focus in anthropology and history, got her BA there at Chico State, I think a master's down at Davis, that led to a number of quite a string of years teaching quickly right here in Chico, where she spent years here in the Chico School District, and then went back to Kansas to get her doctorate, and that led to a long stretch there at Arizona State, maybe?
University of Arizona.
University of Arizona.
Same.
And now she came back to Chico State to finish out her teaching career, really teaching in the Department of Education, focusing a lot on students with disabilities that needed special needs. And now she's just retired, and she is a rising star here in the Chico history circles there. Great researcher, great use of graphics, taken over the chairship at Chico Heritage. And so we are so pleased to have Kathleen Gabriel right here this morning.
Thank you, David. And thanks all for coming today. It's so fun. I hope this all goes well. We told Randy Taylor he's not allowed to be near the TV. No, just kidding you. Just kidding you, Randy. And before I start, I want to also like to thank a few people that have always assisted me in my research and in giving me so much encouragement. And Liz Stewart is right here, and she's on our board at Chico Heritage Association, always helping me out. Yay. I think I saw John Gallardo walk in. John, somewhere, Gallardo, and then Randy Taylor. Those guys they are walking encyclopedias of Chico history. They have always helped me and know, I'm like, I can't find something. They know where to put me at. And Michelle Schover's in the back. And Michelle, thank you so much for all your encouragement and help. Yeah. If you haven't got her book yet, I know it's here for sale. It's fabulous. We did a little book club on it. It's just so much information. It's just wonderful. And also, I saw my husband sneak in, and so he always puts up with me too. He gives a round of applause. All these years. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to be celebrating our 53rd wedding anniversary in about 3 weeks. Of course, I was 10 when we got married. Anyway, thanks for coming. So we're going to look at buildings and families that had businesses in these buildings. And this is sort of an area, and I know a lot of you were looking at it. I put it up. That line right there is Broadway. And that line is 3rd Street. So that gives you a little orientation. But I've got a little bit more of a close-up of that period. So let me know if I'm standing in your guys' way. Right now, this is the circles. I've circled all the different buildings I hope we get a chance to cover today. And we're going to start right there. Anybody know what building that is right there? I'll give you a close-up. Yeah, Collier's. So it all starts with George Jones, early pioneer in Chico. And he didn't really start at Collier's. He started, this is, my little infrared light doesn't work on the TV. This is 1st Street, and there's the Collier building. So when he started back in 68, 65, right in there, they had a store over here on this side, and on the corner of 1st and Main. And his partner was a man named, I don't know, Sudam, S-U-Y-D-A-M, I don't know how to spell it, but he was from San Francisco. And they would advertise, here's some of the things they sold. I mean, everything but the kitchen sink. Oh wait, I think the kitchen sink's on there. There it is. I mean, boots, shoes, you name it, they sold it. Well, then they ended their partnership, a business partnership, but they've always stayed friends in connection with each other. And George goes over and buys this lot over there, and that's First Street on the front and Broadway on the red line there. And there's nothing there, and he's going to build, but when the Masons, the Masonic Lodge, and the IOOF Hall, or the Oddfellows, found out, they said, hey, if you build 2 stories, we'll help pay for it. So it's bam, okay. So they did, and they've had a new store. He was downstairs, and he gets a new partner, and the guy's name is Riley. So they open the store as Jones and Riley Company. The Masons are up on 1/4 of the second floor, and the Oddfellows on 1/4 of the other side. And I thought this little article, I thought this was hilarious. They go, with George Jones' business go-aheadativeness. I'm sorry, is that a word? It must be. Anyway, I guess he's got get up and go. They're sure to be a success. That's what the building looked like. And if you'll notice, there's an awning, and it still looks, upstairs. You might recognize that as Collier Hardware. And this is one of their advertisements, and they kind of stuck just to hardware, though stoves, tinware, rifles, and guns are in there. So, and then he also, I want to just say a couple other things about George Jones, because he loved to go up to Jonesville. Well, it wasn't called Jonesville. He loved to go to Butte Meadows and then beyond, and he camped out there all the time. He actually built that cabin behind the Jonesville, what we now call the Jonesville Hotel, and he'd have events and parties up there, and people would come up there, and so they started calling it Jonesville. So that's what Jonesville is named after, George Jones. Don't know if you knew that or remembered it or forgot it, but there it is. And I thought it was interesting. For a while, the Stevens owned the hotel, and you could stay up there for $250 a night, or $15 for the week. Boy, wouldn't you like to have that this summer? Okay. Well, George dies, and how dare he, in 1873. And Mrs. Jones, it's a little light there, he had a dream to build the dream house, and she decided to go ahead and build his dream house. And there it is. And that is on the corner of 5th and Chestnut. Now, I want to point out a couple of things. You can see the walk all the way across the top, and the porches in the back. Well, in 1909, that's what it looked like. And that was a snowstorm. But you can see that the porch is still across the top, and you can't really see the back because the trees are in there. Well, I've got to get my cheat sheet out here so I make sure I have it. A lot of people know this as the Robinson House. Well, that's because their oldest daughter, Mary Ellen, married J.R. Robinson. And they built 2 more houses on the lot, another house on the lot at the other end. And so Mrs. Jones and one of the daughters moved down to the smaller house, and Mary Ellen and J.R., who had a lot of kids, stayed in this big house. So a lot of people might remember this as the Robinson House. And as the family grew up, and nobody wanted to live in the big old house anymore, this is right on the backs, on the others, the end of the block from the Catholic Church. Well, the Catholic Church bought it, and they used it as a convent for the nuns and the teachers of Notre Dame. Well, the nuns who taught at Notre Dame, I should say. And so that's what it looked like later. You can see they changed the front, and it remained with the Catholic Church until 1953. And then I'm sorry to tell you, this house is not there anymore. It was torn down in 1954 for a sum total of $300. Oh. I know. That's the hardest thing about this research. Well, meanwhile, George's partner, Riley, he's got to find a new partner because he's going to keep the business going. And he'd only come to Chico like 2 years before to partner up with George. So he gets a new partner named Hubbard, and so they keep going, and they just changed the name of the store to Riley and Hubbard, and you can still see they're selling everything there. That's some of their advertisements. Well, 7 years later, Riley dies. I think the hardware business must have been a tough business. It's like, whoa. And that's his wife, and they had 2 kids, and she stays in Chico a couple of more years to handle the estate and selling of their, getting the will all settled. And so Hubbard needs a new partner, and he gets Mr. Earl. Now, what's interesting is Hubbard, the whole time, he really lives in Sacramento. Riley lives in Chico, but Hubbard, the whole time, lived in Sacramento. So he gets Mr. Earl, who moves to Chico. Okay, so that becomes the Hubbard and Earl hardware store, and they're still at what we now call Collier's Hardware. And they had some interesting things. I thought they really were, the early store was really into a lot of equipment and farm equipment, because this was a really big farming community. But I thought that was interesting. I thought, what the heck is a Cassidy gang plow? Well, that's what it is. And that's a guy demonstrating it with his hat on. And a suit. I'm sure people, yeah, you know he's the representative of the equipment. Who farms in a suit? That's pretty funny. Well, this is a map, an 1890 map, and that's what it looked like. The Sanborn maps are fabulous. You can see the big stairways that went up to the two halls on top. Well, except now, Oddfellows, meanwhile, has built their Oddfellow Hall down the street. Okay, where Lee's Pharmacy, that's Oddfellows Hall. Okay, so now Masonic Hall buys them out, and so now they own the whole top half. And Earl and Hubbard are there, and you can see there's a lot of open space around them. It was about 1890 that the Jones, Robert, all the children of George Jones and his wife decided to kind of settle up, and it was right after this time they sold the whole building to the Masonic Lodge. But the hardware store stayed, well, for that time, below. By the way, Earl, he built a home, and I'm sure a lot of you might recognize it. He built this home over on 3rd and Chestnut, right, John? Hazel, thank you. I was looking at John like, see, I use him. He helps me all the time. 3rd and Hazel, and that's what it looked like quite a while ago. And isn't that beautiful? And there's a lot, and that's what it looked like in 1970. And that house is still here today. Ray Murdoch owns that home, and it is a student rental. It's now a rental. Okay. Well, sometime after 1890. Hubbard and Earl are going to move out of that building and move down the street a couple of blocks. But I don't want to go down the road yet. I want to finish up with this building. So just hold the thought. We'll come back to them, where they moved to. So a guy who was working down at Nichols Hardware, his name was McFeely, he resigns and he moves his business into, the building becomes McFeely's Hardware. And he's got sanitary plumbing, and it's still these ads are just hysterical. He also sells a lot of farm equipment, and he sells there it is, the chilled plow that looks like that. Yeah, a lot of. Okay, but he got into more, now I would say, started selling more practical things. So you can see that, well, hay season's here, so he's still catering to the farmers, but he also sells varnish and paints, and I love it, all the canning, it's fruit canning season, and since this is fruit canning season, you can get all your jars and glasses and everything over there at the McFeely Hardware store. Now you might notice that on the bottom it says that he's on 2nd Street. So he did open up a shop on 2nd Street because, here's that building, newer, the post office was on 2nd Street and they wanted to move it. They needed more space, and so they struck a deal that they were going to move into the bottom half of, and you can see the post office sign of the building. And it was on the ground floor, but it didn't go all the way back. It was all the way in the front. So this little part right there in the back, I've got a little picture there for you. There you go. And the very back part of it, McFeely still sold farm equipment, and so he had the 2nd Street shop, but he still kept some business in the far back. Well, the post office, it says it's there till 1960. Now, we all know the post office, which I talk a lot about in my first book, the whole history behind it. $75,000 to build it, but they had to, buy the lot, and they start building it in 1915. But they don't get it done ready for occupancy. They're not ready to move until about February or March of 1916. So that's why they're still down at the other post office. And by the way, we live in a historical home at 6th and Poplar, and the man who built that house was Hudspeth, B.F. Hudspeth, and he was the postmaster at this time, and he orchestrated the whole move, for moving the whole post office from down at that building, the old building, up to the new post office. And I've got more history about that also in the book. Well, meanwhile, McFeely, then he decides to sell, and he sells to Clark. And maybe some of you might remember it used to be called Clark Collier Hardware, somebody when you were young, anyway, but right now it's just Clark. And one of the big items I thought was, I mean, they have really fascinating, what they sell was ice cream makers, of course. Maybe some of you guys have one of those. We have an old one that belonged to my husband's family. It doesn't work anymore. Anyway, Clark lived over here. This is at 4th and Ivy, and that's pretty much what the house looked like. His parents owned that house, and that's where he grew up, in this house. And then after he lived there for a while until after he got married, and then they moved over on the East Sacramento off the Esplanade. That's what it looks like today. So much for keeping its historical aesthetics. Okay. Meanwhile, back at Collier's, they decide, you know, that building was pretty old-fashioned building. They're going to remodel it. And some of the plate glass windows and some of the material they needed to remodel it came from Nichols Hardware Store. And so this is, I know this is a later picture of it, but that's the earliest picture I could find of what it looked like when they were done remodeling it. Because they, you know, put in the glass windows and the doors were, now that's not what Collier's looks like today, but you can see where the doors are on the corner. And anybody here remember Collier's when it looked like that before it remodeled again? They didn't remodel it again until like 56. That's what it looks like today, if you go to Collier's. Okay. Oops, hang on. Oh, there it is. Okay, so here's some of the things they're selling. What I noticed in looking through what were they doing, what were the businesses doing, they just keep changing their products as the needs of the customers change. And so here we go. They're still selling stoves, and but now this is a new oil stove, which I've never heard of before. And I love all the electrical appliances. You know, there's a coffee pot up there. Yeah, isn't that pretty fun? There they are. Now, I wanted to share this picture because you'll see there's still rakes and hammers and saws and hoses, garden hoses. And this person, okay, so Clark brings on Collier as a partner. Okay. This is Collier, and that's Clark. And these two, I don't know who these other people are. And neither does Sil Lucena, so I said, who are these people? They have a question mark. We haven't figured it out yet. But you can see that's what the inside of the store looked like. What do you think, Joe? Do you recognize that? Just for fun, to follow it through, Collier Clark then retires, Collier takes over. Clark sells it to Cecil Hitt and Jack Bowen, and then Jack Bowen sells his part of the partnership to Sil Lucena. And then shortly after there, Mr. Hitt he's at a hardware convention, he has a heart attack, and he said, that's it, I'm getting out of this, so he retires. And so it becomes just Sil Lucena's building, and now his sons are running, have taken over the business. So, but meanwhile, so we've looked at two of those places. Meanwhile, remember I told you that Hubbard and Earl moved down the street? Well, that's where they moved to. So we'll talk about this building. This is right down on Broadway. This building's still standing, and I think when I show you some pictures of it, you'll recognize it. Well, in my first book, I do talk a lot about the different pharmacies and emphasis on Bartlett Pharmacy, but there was Jerry Noonan, who was a pharmacist on Main Street. And he also owned a lot of different property and had his fingers in different types of businesses, but he was mainly known for being the pharmacist and having his drugstore. Well, he dies young, and this is his wife, and she decides to go ahead. They had plans to build a beautiful building at 3rd and Broadway. And there you can see on the top of that block, it used to say J.C. Noonan. She built that in 1889 in honor of him. And that's what it looks like when it was first built. And that picture's also in the first book. That particular picture, and you can see the horse and wagon. Now, the hardware store, when they move down there, they only take up half of it. On the other, there's another store in the middle, and then on a meat market on the side. So there's actually like 3 different businesses in that building. So I guess they take up 1/3 of it. It goes all the way back. And sometime after 1892, we can't figure out the exact date. We're trying to pin it down of when Hubbard and Earl moved down there, but they did. And it's sometime right after 1892, and that's their advertisements. Now we're going to move down a little further down the street, so we're still on Broadway. You still see that? I was thinking, okay, how can you see? I was just hoping you could see. So this little, anybody got any idea where that yellow line's pointing to? Down the street? Pardon me?
Stansbury?
Actually, no, but Stansbury's nearby. It's Nichols Hardware, and that's the Nichols who started the store, and that's what it first looked like when he first started in 1883. And that was a wooden, not a brick building. And okay, for a while there was a wealthy landlord further south outside of town, and his name was Hawkins, and his wife died. He decided to sell his ranch and come into town. And so for about 3 years he partnered up with Nichols, and so when you see the old posters that say Nichols and Hardware, Nichols and Hawkins, he was with them, but only a really short time, because he then moved and had his own hardware store also later. There was a lot of hardware stores in Chico. Okay, and there's another, and they sold a lot of plows and a lot of farm equipment. There we go. And that's more what the store looked like in 1945, if anyone might remember what that looks like. There was a fire in the 50s when that building burned down. Well, what's amazing, and I don't know if I was just stunned, is they also built a beautiful home. And I'm always fascinated by these people. Who built these houses? And you know, and Michelle points out to me in her book that a lot of folks in the early days, the way they could show their, say, financial stability or their success is they would build a really beautiful home. So they wouldn't, you know, you didn't have credit cards or other things. Your home would stand for, see, I'm a successful business person. I have this beautiful home. And so if you want to borrow money from me, no. Which a lot of them did, made a lot of loans of money. So this, now this is a Sanborn map, and you're looking, let me just point, sorry. So this is Broadway, okay? And in fact, this right here, it says moving pictures, that's the Silverstein building, the hotel, which actually I have more pictures of that in the book, but I'm gonna skip that right now. Here's the hardware store, and they have some plumbing and stuff. So this is Salem, okay? And we're gonna look at, this is where the Nichols built their home. This wasn't there yet, this is a later map, and then I'll show you that home also. That was another businessman in town. So, it says new residence, 1886, Nichols, and they're going to be building a home right next to Mr. Thomas Crew. There it is. And this will knock your socks off. Look at this home. Yeah, and to show you how big it is, can you see there's a little person in the front, at the front gate? Yeah. Except for it's a grown man, so maybe it's a short man. It's a really big house. And you'll see down the street is the Crew house. And later it was known as the Crew Canfield house because one of the Crew's children married a Canfield. So that's that house down there.
Do we know what that one-story building is?
Yeah, actually that house was occupied by Camper, not the Camper who had the wagons, but Camper who was the principal and the superintendent, the teacher. And I can't find any other picture of it, because then they moved actually over by me on Woodland, where we live. I want to show you a couple of more views of this house. It's just, this is the front of it during a snowstorm in Chico. And this is, you know, the next picture is, the address was actually on 4th Street. And this is the front of it. But look at this thing. The Nichols actually lived in this house, and the last, May Nichols was the last daughter that lived there, never married, and after she passed away in 1940, they rented it for a couple of years, and then, of course, you know what this is now, right? A parking lot. What else? Yeah, it's right, right behind Bank of America. So Bank of America built where the Nichols Hardware store is. I know. Look at that.
Tear it down, or was it burned down?
No, it was torn down. It was not burned down. I know. This, I'm telling you, the heart is, it's like, what? It's like, and then I just wanted to show you, so this is an aerial view, so bear with me here. Here's the Cruz house, the one in the middle, and there's the Nichols house. So I thought you might like to see what the Crew house looked like. I remember that house, little drawing of it. That's what it looked like. And that too was torn down. That house sat who said Stansbury? They guessed that was the Stansbury. That house was catty corner from the Stansbury house. Okay, so now we're going to go down to Main Street. So we're going to go look at what's going on over there. Okay, so these are some of the hardware stores that were in town that were, I call it the competition. And so you got Earl and Hubbard. They actually took over Hawkins and Elliott's store. And we have Nichols on the top. And then right there, Hubble's. And this one really fascinating because they sell the pinless clothesline. I'm thinking, okay, how did that work? Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, we're going, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And there is Mr. Hubble himself. He was born in 1852. He died in 1934. And here's some more of his advertisement. Now, he's really expanding now. He sells fishing tackle, ammunition, paints, oils, you name it. Look at that. Rope, belting, hose. I mean, you got it. They sell it. And including tin and iron roofing. I mean, they got it all. And first he was with the partner, and then he goes out on his own. And yeah, look at the prices. And that's the store, the Eagle. He named his new store. Can you guess where that is, the Eagle store? Oh, I just showed you the address, never mind. It's up there, 2nd and Main. Guess what it is? There's the answer. Northeast corner. And that, he builds a home. Oops, I want to get back to, and so there, if you're looking, you see the Hotel Oaks in the middle? Mm-hmm. Okay. So he's on, and then over here is First Street. We've got going here, I'm going to give you a close-up where he built his house. Okay, and it's going to be right there. That's his house that he built. It is a that's what it looks like. That's what the picture and that's a horrible picture. I don't really have, it's really hard finding pictures of some of these houses that are long gone. If anyone has one, please let me know and maybe I could copy it or get a picture from you. That's what it looked like. This is the best picture we got. It looks like it was kind of water stained or something. And it's 3 stories, and they did rent out one of the floors, but I don't know which one. No information. This building lasted quite a while, and at one time in the early maps, he owned property on both sides, so he had a nice big lot. Unfortunately, he didn't really stay in Chico a lot, and he kept selling off the sides. So right before they tore all those buildings down to build the Humanities building right over here, that's what it looked like. And that's thanks to David's father took that picture. John Noble took that picture. And you can see the 2 little houses beside it are kind of look dwarfed next to it. But what a beautiful, and then I think, okay, back to, that's where the store was. That's what it became in 1952. The JV shop. Okay. All right, moving right along. Oh, there's 2 more houses on that first street that I want to talk about where the red arrows are, because I just found them to be so interesting. And that's sort of a close-up. The best aerial pictures are when the trees don't have leaves on them. The one thing about Chico, it's tough to get pictures when the trees are in the way. What the heck? So you can see there's the Hubble house, like right here. And then if you go down the street, this was blank, and there's this house, and then this house, which is huge. Okay, we'll start with the first house. It was built by a man named, 2 more beautiful homes. That's what it looks like on the map. So you can see they were the only 2 houses on that block. And the house that we're going to look at is Mrs. Hollison's house. Now, who built it was a man named Mr. Levins, and he owned a hotel and a bar in Cana. There's no remnants of that left. And he also, so he comes in, that's the best, sorry, it's a picture in the paper. So he comes in and he buys the White House, which was a department store downtown. And he goes, I don't know what happens to him. He goes out of business. Mrs. Hollison kicks him to the curb. She gets a divorce. And she has a daughter, and they stay at this house. Well, Chico State needed housing. They were, the college was growing. They didn't have housing. And so they asked Mrs. Hollison, would you house some students? And she said, sure. We've got a nice big house. We'll do that. And so she started renting out rooms to young ladies at Chico State. She was a seamstress and did altering of, made gowns and altered gowns. And so when Chico in the late 1800s had lots of, very formal dances at the Armory Hall, at different New Year's Eve, and they'd have these big dances, the ladies in town that could afford her would go to her, and she'd design the dress and would fit them, and it would all be kept secret because no one wanted to know what your dress looked like until you got to the dance. Some things never change. And so then when the railroad came, they needed housing for the railroad workers, so the ladies moved out and the men moved in, and then later she still rented to different people. Her daughter, after she passed away, her daughter married Cutterback, Mr. Cutterback, and that became known as the Cutterback House. And then later Chico State called it, they used it for all approved housing when the Cutterbacks moved out, and they called it the Gables. So anybody remember that? And it wasn't torn down until, I have to look at my cheat sheet, the 50s. No, it's right before, it wasn't turned down until the 60s, excuse me, because that's right when they built, it was after they built the Humanities Building. So right next to it was the Faulkner home, and that, by the way, both of these pictures were pictures that were taken right before they were torn down. And so that's the only pictures I've been able to find. Again, if anyone has pictures, I would love it. This was the Faulkner home, and he came to Chico in the 1800s, and then his son, Louis, he married here, and he was he the banker? Wait a minute. Sorry, there's all things. I got my cheat sheets out. His son became the banker. They own lots of property. This is going to lead into the next downtown property. And that's right before it was torn down too, and that was the best. That's the only picture I could find of this beautiful home. In fact, there's other aerial pictures, and it's just a parking lot. So that was gone too. Well, one of the pieces of property that he owned was this one right there. And nothing was really there at that time. A Chinese wash house was there for a little while. And meanwhile, next door to Nichols Hardware was a young man named Nodelman, Fred Nodelman. And he was a harness maker and saddle maker, and he was doing really well. He needed more room. And so he takes over, there he is, Fred Nodelman, 1872, 1917, he passed away. And he decided he needed more space. He bought the property from Faulkner and built. This was eventually becomes, well, you'll see, I'll take you through it. This was his first place. Now, on one side is another store, and then his harness shop is on the right-hand side. Sorry. And that was, when they built that, it was only 2 stories, and it was 1901. This is, again, I find these maps, looks a little confusing, but I'll try to point out a couple of things. So this is 3rd Street, so over here's Main, and over here is Broadway, okay? This is the Johnson House, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, which was a hotel and shops down below. The Union Hotel, which I give a whole history of that also in my first book. And then here, the Nodelman's, it says vehicles, like wagons and harness shop, was right in the middle. Now, we'll take you through what happens to that building, the Nodelman building. They decided to add a story onto it. And so it becomes a 3-story building. And And on the second floor, a jeweler moves in who makes class rings and pendants. And so there's a big article in the newspaper like, oh, you don't have to send our orders down to San Francisco anymore. We can get our class rings and our things like that we want made right here in town. And on the third floor is it's apartments, and the woman who owns it, or who runs the apartment house, her name is Mrs. Light, which I'll tell you just a little bit more about the lighthouse in a minute. Some of you probably already know. Well, meanwhile, you saw that Mr. Parker had started a hardware store down on the Esplanade where, you know where the tavern is, the Red Tavern? Okay, and then next door is Sounds by Dave, and now on the corner is like Edward Jones. Well, there used to be a grocery store there, Burns Market. Well, before Burns Market, it was the Parker hardware store. So Parker's hardware store, after Mr. Noonan died, they moved into the building. And that is a picture of 3rd Street, which I'm hoping a lot of you might remember what 3rd Street looked like. Patty's Typewriter across the street, Osier's building on the right-hand side, and a little close-up of there's Parker Hardware, and there you go. There's that beautiful 3rd-story building, 3-story building. Anyone recognize what this is right here? It was a jewelry store. Bedford's Jewelry, who sold to Cox Jewelry. Okay, well, that's the wrong picture that goes with it, because the Painted Ladies, the prostitution house that was running, it was really on the 3rd floor. And what's hysterical about this is that Mrs. Light, her husband is one of the constables. Yeah, and so there's a story where they keep having raids on some of the prostitution houses. They know something's going on there, and they can never find anything. Well, guess what? I think they're getting an early warning. Like, look out, clear the decks. The policemen are coming down. There were several. This wasn't the only one. So, and then I thought this was really interesting. Sharon Shaw, is she here today? Some of you may know Sharon. She wrote this story about, she said, my great uncle James and his wife are the ones who had the lighthouse, and her mother can remember as a little girl going up to see their aunt, and was fascinated with all the ladies in their fancy dresses that were up there. So we have a first-hand account of that. Next door, the Johnson house, they had a little hanky-panky going on there too. That's what the old picture looked like, and that's when they are tearing. It was 3 stories, and I do not know what year that is. I'm looking at the vehicles. That we know that the Parker house is right, the Parker hardware store is right behind it. It's still 3 stories, but there they are taking it down to 1 story. They're taking only down the front of it. The building in the back remains there until the Silver Room fire in 1970. So they only took down the front part of that old hotel. Let's see. And there's the Parker building. So Parker's remodeled. And I know. I forgot to tell you how depressing this would be. It's like, oh, geez. And that happened in 1949, and they took in some additional space. And pretty much that's the way it looks today. How we doing on time? Okay, we're okay. Now, what's interesting is that building was set for demolition in 1979. Maybe some of you remember that. And yeah, and pardon me?
Jackie buys it.
Yes, but what really saved the building, and I know I'm going to not tell it right, but John Gallardo was part of this group, and there was a group of people that got together and they said, you can't destroy any more downtown buildings, this is crazy. Jackie Headley, John Nancy Lindahl, who was a Parker. Her grandmother was she was a Quiggle. Her grandfather was Fred Parker that started. And who else? John
John Jackson.
Yeah, Jonah Jackson. And they got together and said, we've got to save these buildings. This is crazy. And so that they couldn't save them unless they did an inventory and, you know, started doing research on the buildings. And that's when they started doing a lot of, and is that exactly about, by 1981, the Chico Heritage Association became an official organization in Chico and has saved, right in 1981, I believe was the year, and they literally, by documenting all these buildings and putting this all together, is what saved a lot of the historical buildings in Chico and stopped it. And by the way, one of the great things that came out of all this, Bob Somerville also was later involved, was something that happened that was created. It was called the Architectural Review and Historical Preservation Board, which started and was since in there. And so anytime you want to do something with a historical building, you've got to go through that board. Except I hate to tell you this, folks, right now that board is in danger of being demolished. And so if you have concern and you love all the historical buildings, please call your city councilman. This is a political advertisement right here, or the city planning, and say, whoa, 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 what are you doing? They want to make it smaller and just wrap it into city planning. And we know that'll be devastating to some of the historical buildings in town. So if you like historical buildings, now's the time to do a little, maybe a phone call saying, please keep that board. That's my political pitch for the day. Okay. I'm going to come back this building over there, and we're going to come back to that side. And that is, there you go, it was built by John Bidwell in 1861. And that's the earliest picture we have of it. Thanks to Randy Taylor found that picture, I believe, and shared that with us all. And this is, if you were standing inside what is now the children's playground and looking down south Broadway, that building is over there on the right side. So we've got Collier. It's so much easier if my infrared would work, but it doesn't. So here we've got, that's the Bidwell building, here's our Collier Hardware building, and then of course the IOF hall's down there. Let me move out of these folks' way, sorry, when I stood in front. The Bidwells kept that building, and even after John Bidwell died, Annie used that building with her real estate. She had to sell off a lot of land. They were in a lot of debt when John Bidwell died, and one of the ways she got out of debt was they started dividing up land and selling lots. And for a while, she had a real estate person was in the bottom, one of the offices down there. Other people also had some they rented out upstairs. It was a two-story building as apartments, and then downstairs were a couple of stores. Well, this is interesting because she is now going to upgrade the building and install plate glass windows in the front. And I thought that was, and they're going to modernize. And they said over here, she's basically doing it to keep up with the Joneses, the Colliers across the street. And so whatever they're doing with the Masonic building across the street, Annie's going to keep up with it. As soon as they make the adjustments, she sells it to the Kilpatrick family. And the Kilpatrick family is going to not just be a grocery store, but a groceryetta store. And they're getting all ready, and he's shopping, getting ready to open. Now, what's so interesting about this grocery store is that you get to wait on yourself, because before you'd go in and you'd tell the grocer what you wanted and they'd get it down the shelf for you. Now they're going to give you a basket and you go around and pick your own groceries. This is like modern, this is new invention. And you know, it says the counters are arranged so you can go around, and then the last line, he says, then when you get all your goods, you go up to the cashier desk, and he goes, where the goods are wrapped as she passes out. What, from the cost? I don't know. As she passes out, I don't know. Anyway, there's an old photograph of the Kilpatrick store when it's still 2 stories, and that's they opened up that store in 1916, and so looks a little different. Even they're putting the new plate glass windows, but you'll notice in the middle is double doors to the stairway that leads upstairs. Okay, and they give a new sign. They stay there for a long time, and that's a nice look of downtown Chico. take a guess, I don't know, 40s? I can't tell by the cars. I'm not up on latest cars.
Late 40s cars.
Yeah, so you can see the grocery. Yeah. And there's their new sign. And here's one of their ads with their, the food buyer's mecca. And this is a 1948 ad of their store. And some of their early ads, now Karen Kilpatrick, who is granddaughter of Fred Kilpatrick, who started this store, and she remembers as a little girl when the store was still there at First and Broadway, that there was a counter in there and you could actually order like a hamburger and cold drinks, and so I guess they served that also on the side. And they also, there's some of their early ads. One of the sons, after Fred died, actually one of the sons, he lived over on First Avenue, had bought this house, and this house is still standing, yay! And it's on 4th Street, and so it was built in 1910. This said 1910, so we don't have the exact date. And this is one of the sons purchased the home in 1922, and he was T.P. Kilpatrick was the one who started that. I said Fred, sorry, that was Fred Parker, so I mixed up the hardware. And that's what it looked like then. It was remodeled, and in 1952, they moved over to 5th and Flume in a brand new grocery store, and the Wood Brothers, somebody remember the Wood Brothers store, bought that, and that's how what it looked like in 1952. So we went from there, took off the top, remodeled it, and went to there. Now this store, what's there now, right? Tres Hombres, right. So, but the basement, I remember this store so well, because when I'm in 6th grade, 7th grade, my parents added on to our house, and my sister and I are going to get a new bedroom set. And so we go to Woods Furniture store, and all the bedroom furniture is in the basement. And I can remember going down to the basement where all the beds and the twin beds and the dressers, everything's in the basement. It was pretty fun. So those are the main buildings I had for you today. And thank you for coming, and I'll take any questions if you wanted to leave some time. Thank you.
There's two brothers named Hubbard that I think they just bought Ellis's. You know if they're related?
I don't. But the Hubbard, he never came to Chico, so I don't know. We'd have to ask them. I'd have to search the family. He actually the whole time lived in Sacramento and had the partner run the store up here. Yeah. Yes?
Well, what would be the incentive for taking a store off of a building?
Now, if anyone can answer that, you get a prize. I don't know what the prize is. You get a free donut in the back. We don't know, because it couldn't have been earthquake. I mean, if you look at the dates when they were taken down. We've talked about this all the time. Why would you take down the second story? One of the other buildings I did not include in the presentation is across the street from what is now Starbucks, where the Lee Pharmacy store used to be. Right across the street is the little clothing store, Breslau. That used to be 2 stories. And we have blueprints that show the 2-story building. So I don't know if they just didn't want to deal with it, if it was maybe taxes were based on square footage. If you go on the East Coast, and every time we travel, we go to where's the old part of town? And especially on the East Coast, they've got real narrow stores that go up like 3 stories, because taxes were based on your store frontage that you had on the street. So you would get less taxes if your store was narrow and went up. So I don't know, maybe in California it was different, and so people just didn't want to deal with the second story. But,
I find it interesting that a lot of the stores had nothing but windows on the bottom. Second story, I mean, by today's structural,
yes.
regulations, that's called a soft story. It's really an unsteady building.
Well, maybe that's why they took it down. Maybe here's our architect here.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think we got a second. we only got about 6 minutes. I'm always going over, so I was trying. This is another one that I thought if we had a little extra time, I'd show you. This was the bank building that was on the corner of, now the tap room. It was on the corner of 3rd and Broadway, and I write a lot about that in my first book also. And that was also torn down, this 4-story building that was just gorgeous. In my book, I tell a story about when I was a little girl, everything was downtown. Dentist office, doctor's office, everybody was downtown. In fact, the first time I broke my arm, when I was, yeah, I've broken my arm several times. But I was, Dr. Mason, our doctor was Dr. Tom over here on Wall Street, and Dr. Mason was right here on the corner of 1st and Salem. And anyway, but everybody was downtown. So I can remember my dentist was on I don't remember which floor, I'm sorry, it was either the 2nd or 3rd floor, but the elevator was not a push self-operating elevator. There was an elevator man, and you'd go in, and he you know, would run the little things, and he never would get the floor quite right. I can remember my mother kind of rolling her eyes as he was, you know, as kids, we're like, yoo-hoo, this is fun. It's like fair time. And and then of course, I know y'all remember Coochie's Candies was in that building. And I can remember, again, looking for pictures of inside Cooch's. It was, I cannot find anything. I've asked everybody. You know, we just didn't take pictures like you used to. And I mean, like you do now. You didn't take pictures, maybe standing like this with your Easter basket, you know, or, you know. And then another building, okay, so this one is right before it was torn down. There had to be a beautiful home. So this is the Phoenix building that's still there. Here's the Moorhead building, which has just been beautifully redone, Wayne Cook. I'm going to lean back, Margaret, so you can see too. So here's 3rd Street, right? Okay, and this church is gone. And this was the parsonage for that. And of course, that gas station's gone. Okay, so there was a building there that was a mortuary. But they lived there too. Eggers was their name. So this house right there, here's a picture of it right before, you can see it, right, it's condemned, right before they tear it down. And the person who lived there, his name was Oliver, Dr. C, Cassius, something like that, Oliver. And the house is really quite large. It's a beautiful old home. And I do not remember that home, but it was not torn down till 60s. So a lot of these, it seemed like during 50s and 60s, that's when a lot of those houses were torn down. So, anyway, yes?
I have an ancillary question to the building that had the 3rd story added.
Yes.
Is there any evidence that it was originally designed to be 3 stories and maybe they ran out of money and then later went up?
There might be, I'll search for it, but there's some of the buildings that I've researched, they'll say something like they're building a single story and might add another story on. For example, the Eagle Hardware store, there's this big ad that he's going to add a 2nd story. They need a hall, he's going to add a 2nd story, but then it never happened. So one of the things that fascinates me is about why they had all these 2nd stories, and they were all used, but they were used by organizations, because to belong to Eastern Star or to Masons or to the Odd Fellows or the Eagles, you know, everybody belonged to clubs, and you'd have your big gatherings in these halls, or you'd have dances, you know, events.
The 3rd stories were for the ladies of the night.
And the 3rd stories for the, you'd go and, yeah, the ladies of the night. Yes.
I recall that when the new post office was put in on the south side of the plaza, that an Episcopal church got moved.
Yes, yes. Actually, I tell that story in the book. What happened is, the federal government, I hope I get this right, had allotted so much money to buy the property and then so much money to build the building. And I think it was like $15,000 was allotted to buy property. Well, the church said, forget it, $15,000, we got to move our church. This is going to be a nightmare. We want $25,000. And the church, by the way, is the one that's right down the block here, kind of down from Mom's restaurant. So what are they going to do? That's where they want to build the post office. So Silverstein, I'm sorry, said his name wrong, who owned the hotel that is now where Stopel's is, okay. So he said, we'll raise the money. And they started raising money. They raised the $10,000 so they could buy the plot of land and move the building. And then they built the post office. And what's interesting about the post office, I mean, that's quite a story, because it has secret staircases, and they had places, they had that IRS was going to be in there, and they had, you know, where somebody could go and watch and make sure the mail clerks were doing everything right, because a lot of money orders, a lot of things went through the post office. And so, yeah, but that was a church there first. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. So, yes?
I just want to expand on your political call to arms.
Yes.
After being a city planner for the town of Paradise and the city of Gridley, where I watched them take down historic buildings, I ended up becoming the principal planner for Chico and joining Chico Heritage. And that's 1990. And at that point, you could come into the building department and get it at the counter that day. So any building in Chico, the Senator, any of our historic buildings, gone by just going to the building counter. So in 1994, we did the general plan. Bob Somerville, we hired Bob to work for us, and it was the first time we had any teeth. Now, I researched this, and for about 30 years, it kept coming before the city council to have some historic preservation ordinance, and they kept turning it down. And finally, I got it in the zoning regulations that we had a cooling off period. You could not go to that counter and get a demo permit for any building that was on our historical list that was done by Chico Heritage. So cooling off period, they couldn't do that. But I'm looking at the kind of climate that's happening right now in our city council. We had also a requirement, because we're so hot here in Chico, that developers that did parking lots had to shade that parking lot 50% by June 12th in so many years. They just eliminated that. They said, oh, it's too onerous on the developers. So we have a group here today that supports historic preservation. You can keep very close watch on what they're doing, and it's so important to have this historic preservation architectural board. I staff both the ARB, which was just the architectural review board, and the planning commission. And the planning commission has a big job just looking at uses that are going to occur in our town, not historical. That's a whole different line of expertise. So please voice just what Kathleen was saying.
Yes.
Support historic preservation, support the city making developers preserve our buildings.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Tell me your name again.
Pam Figge.
Oh, Pam. And Pam wrote a wonderful letter, didn't you? Did you write that?
Recently.
Yes, and we...
Mike Larry did.
Yes, and we just wrote letters, and but you know, there's nothing like phone calls from the public who say, whoa, 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 we do not want you to do away with this board. It's just so important. And the thing is, you know, in my career, being a person that's involved in, through my life, I moved in from being a general education teacher into a special education teacher, and what I found out all the time is we were always a minority, we were always outvoted. So unless you have your own board, you kind of get swallowed up by the majority. Well, they want to take that, they'll tell you, well, we're not going to get rid of the historical board, we're just going to move it into planning. Well, there'd be like 3 people on a panel of 10, so all of a sudden you become your voice is like this instead of like this. So we're really urging to say, no, we have to keep this historical board. And so if you just talk to give a call or an email to your city council representative or to the whole city council. I sent one to the whole city council. It's like, you don't know me, but. And so to do that is really, you know, please feel free to speak up. I think that's kind of it's a bipartisan issue that if we all care about historical buildings in our town. So, well, that was my beeper that went off, and appreciate you coming today. And again, oops, and we've got the book on sale for 20% off if you want to get one, and I'll stick around for other questions. And so thank you so much again.